Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete podcast, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human. Welcome to the Journey of an Aesthete. This is a special show indeed. Allow me to explain. If you recall my interview show with Smriti Shankar, I said to her, you know what? I said to her, I would love on my show to have, and I was using as an example off of the top of my head, a football quarterback on my show or somebody that does something in that field, that line of work, because I said I love to talk to people, not only people who are inspiring, whatever their field is, doesn't matter the field, as long as they're inspiring and they've accomplished a lot, but also somebody that's chosen a very different path in life than I've chosen. I've never been a football quarterback. I'm no jock. I've never had anything to do with anything like that, but I would love to talk to somebody like that. Well, lo and behold, we have today a genuine, real athlete, and this is Doug Kurtis. Hello, Doug.
Hi, Mitch.
Doug Kurtis has done so much in running. It's pretty remarkable. We're going to talk about his career, not only his personal life and how he came to be the runner he is, but also other things he's done. Because am I right that you've had many careers, many hats?
Like you, Mitch, I like to wear hats, so I have many of them.
Right. So, I mean, I'm looking at your information here now. You've done in the year 2013. You had already done 200 marathons.
That's
in
correct.
3 hours, correct?
Under 3 hours.
Under 3 hours.
Under 3 hours.
Under 3 hours, 200 marathons. And your 200th was in your hometown of Detroit, correct?
That's
Detroit
correct.
Free Press.
Took me 3 tries. I ran Boston, then one of my favorite marathons, Grandma's Marathon up in Detroit, or up in Duluth, Minnesota. It was just really hot weather, so it turned out that I did it at home, and I was happy that it worked out that way, because all my friends and my family and my running club members, were all there to cheer me on, and it was just a really great experience.
I mean, yeah, so we could talk about Detroit because, as you know, I went to Interlochen Arts Academy, Michigan, Traverse City, and this was in the mid-'80s, and every day I read the paper there. That was back when people read newspapers, and there were newspaper bins, and all that, and back in the analog age, and I would read something called the Detroit Free Press just because it was there. So you're connected with the Detroit Free Press as well, right?
In several ways. I was the race director. I completely changed the race around back in, actually 20 years ago, 1999, I became the director.
What did you change? What was it before, and then what does that mean when you say you changed it?
So what happened, well, for one, I was on an advisory committee, just to kind of give you a backstory, and I was throwing the committee a ton of ideas because I'd been all over the world running marathons. So I saw what could be done, and I wanted to make some of those changes in Detroit. But the organization was really, their job was putting on the Grand Prix in Detroit. Yeah. So this was just kind of a side summer job, and they didn't really care about running. And so I walked into the offices. I knew the former director, who was an executive at the Free Press, and I told Barbara Benage was her name. And I said, Barbara, if they're not going to at least entertain some of my ideas, what's the point of me being on this committee? And she said, well, I got a better idea. Why don't you take over the race? And I'm like, really? And she said, yeah, really. So I went back to my boss at Ford Motor Company, and I talked to some people I worked with at Ford, and I said, if you can give me the flexibility, in my job, I'll put on this event. And they said, absolutely. They were they liked their employees involved in the community, and I said, this is going to be something really, really good for the community of Detroit if you let me do this. And they said, absolutely, go do it. And the first year I instituted like 20 different new ideas. The biggest one was having the run go over the Ambassador Bridge, which is a privately owned bridge. So the race used to start in Windsor, Canada, and all the runners got bussed over to that area. And I said, there's no way we can grow this race and bus. Can you imagine today trying to bus? You couldn't do it. 20,000 people being bussed over to the bridge. And back then there was only 3,000 runners. So my first year I had the race, I bugged the bridge people for about 6 months. And they said, well, we're working on the bridge. And I said, I figured it out. I said, you're always working on the bridge. You start at one end, you go to the other, and you start over, you know? So then I brought in some big guns. I got the publisher of the Free Press, and then
That's
the owner,
fantastic.
the owner of
Great paper, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great paper.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about later, but I was a writer too for the Free Press.
That's right. You were a journalist for the Free Press.
Yeah, I did a weekly
sports
column.
writer.
Yeah, sports writer, weekly column. But anyway, I got the owner of the Detroit Tigers. I wanted the race to finish because it was going to be the last year the Tigers were playing in the stadium. And I said, hey, can we use the stadium? And they said, well, it's owned by the city if the city says yes. So they said, okay. And I had the runners come in from the outfield.
Yeah.
The finish line was at first base. And then you had a finish chute that crossed home plate. And I wished back then I'd had a video camera because the coolest thing to watch was the runners would be kind of hobbling past the finish line, but they'd see the home plate and they would slide across home plate after they'd finished 26.2 miles. But once I did that, the race doubled. The numbers went from 3,000 to 6,000. And now really one of the highlights of the marathon is running over the bridge into Canada because it's right at dawn. So you see, it's the sun coming up on both sides of the borders. And it's just a beautiful experience going over the bridge.
So that's remarkable. So you basically changed the culture. Would you put it that way? Change the culture of that particular race.
Yes. And then we added more events. So that race went from 3,000. Now this year they had 27,000 people. And, back years ago where people might think of running as, an elite sport and now your average person off the street, some people that could literally not even run around their block 3 years later are running a marathon. In fact, one of my favorite columns to write, I had what we called the greenie column. So I stole this idea from Las Vegas. But first-time marathoners get a green number. And so everybody knows them as the greenies. So when you see them running on the course, you yell, hey, first-timer, you're wearing a green number. So I would write this column, and I would interview about 30 or 40 people and narrow it down to about 10 that had really good stories.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And it was an amazing...
Man, I'd love to hear just one of those stories now. I don't know what comes to your mind about that.
Well, I'll tell you one, simple one. This woman, she was assistant athletic director at Eastern Michigan University, and she decided she wanted to run a marathon. She's in the world of sports and said, I should be able to do a marathon. So running around Ypsilanti, she was a little hesitant at night to go running on the road, so she decided she'd run on the track. But to go do, let's say, a 10-mile run, trying to keep track of your laps was, really difficult to do. So what she would do, with her jacket, she'd put like 25 or 30 popcorn kernels in her little satchel there. And every time she'd finish a lap, she'd throw out a popcorn kernel. So by the time, she's, I'm on my last kernel, she knew she had done her last lap, if it was 30 laps or whatever, and I thought that was a great story.
That is a great story. I mean, in fact, getting ready for you this show, I went on a movie binge watching marathon, and I'll tell you the names of the pictures I watched. Second Wind. Know this film with James Naughton, 1976.
Okay.
See How She Runs with Joanne Woodward.
I remember that one.
And Running with Michael Douglas.
Yeah.
And that makes you laugh, that one.
Yeah. That was one of the worst running movies I've seen.
Really?
And it's funny because, and people can't see me, but...
Are you in that movie?
No, but... About once a week, people stop me on the street and they think that I look like Michael Douglas. So I get that I get it all the time. It's pretty funny.
That's why I mentioned that.
But there are a few, like Chariots of Fire. I mean, there are a few really well done. In fact, there was a movie last year, Brittany Runs a Marathon, that was done in New York.
I like that picture.
Yeah, and that actually was pretty good.
Really good.
So, yeah.
Really good. But I was just talking about more, kind of older pictures, or these are Second Wind is a Canadian film, I think. I don't know if you've seen it. It's Lindsay Wagner and
no, but I'll check
James
that
Naughton.
out.
But what's great about it is the character James Naughton, and that happens a lot in the plot, is that he gets the bug. He becomes a runner, and he's training, and like the whole world's against him. The boss is against him. The wife, Lindsay Wagner, doesn't understand, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting your time and all this? It's almost like the adversity, right? People not understanding what he's doing.
Yeah. they're doing something difficult that they think's too hard to do.
Yeah, and this man has a trainer in the film, and his trainer's older, of course, and has been around, a crusty sort of figure, and it's great watching this little movie because at the end he runs the marathon. So it's sort of overcoming. I guess the plot is a person having a vision, having a dream, and realizing that dream in the face of adversity, people not understanding what they're doing. And that gets us to your biography, because on my show I like to do what I call linear chronology, which means we're going to start from the very beginning, before you were an athlete. Maybe you were always an athlete, I don't know. Yeah. But talk about how you became the runner that you are, or that you became, were you always a physically active person?
I was always physically active. I was in a neighborhood with a ton of kids, and we were always, not like today where everything's organized. We just get a whole group of kids together and go out and play baseball in the park, or a football game, or hockey, because, we're up in Michigan. And so I always played sports. I played I didn't know I was a runner till my junior year of high school. I played a lot of other sports up until that point.
What did you play now? But hockey?
No, I played baseball. I tried to play basketball. I was, just okay. And it was one of those 10-minute runs in gym class. And the coach said, "Oh, you know what? I beat everybody." And the coach said, "Oh, you should be run out for the track team." Mm-hmm. Well, the track coach was actually the football coach too.
Speaking of football,
yeah. And he said, "Well, we've already started the season. Can you come back next year?" So I missed a whole season of track my sophomore year because the coach he had no clue that I had this talent. And by my senior year of high school, I was an all-state runner. And then I went from that to Michigan State, where I started out as the worst guy on the team. I finished last.
MSU?
I finished last my first cross-country race.
What year would that been?
That would have been 1970.
Yep.
The cross-country season was 1970. And again, I just thought, well, we were Big Ten champs, so I was on a really good team, and I hung on for 2 years, and I did okay, but I did not know I had the talent. You did not,
even though you were doing it.
Yeah.
No, when you make that statement, I did not know I had the talent. What does that actually?
And I mean the
mean?
Talent to run marathons. So, So my senior year, I was playing other sports too. I was skiing. I was doing like intramural football, and
it sounds like you have a lot of talent if you're doing football and doing all this skiing.
Playing racquetball. And so anyway, my senior, I roomed in a house like 50 guys, a co-op house.
Oh my God.
And this one guy had run the Boston Marathon, and he said, "You know what? Let's all go run the Boston Marathon this year." So like 6 of us all hopped in a car and went out to Boston.
Was that 71?
74.
74.
1974. So back then, you didn't have all the knowledge of running a marathon that compared to back then, and so I got to Boston. I didn't have a great pair of shoes, so I thought I'd put an extra thick pair of socks on that might give me more cushioning. Yeah. And then my friend's like, "Well, we don't want to start in the back." And back then Boston had about 2,000 runners, and that was the biggest marathon in the country at the time. Right. And so I started out the race. The first 10 miles of Boston are all downhill out of Hopkinton. And
they still do it out of Hopkinton.
They still finish at Hopkinton, or start at Hopkinton. Yeah. And so I got blisters really bad, both feet. And I took my shoes off, and I'm running. Here I'm only at mile 10, and I'm running in my socks. And I went into a drugstore because they have all these little villages, and I saw a drugstore. Ran in the drugstore. I saw the druggist. I said, "I got blisters. Can you help me?" He goes, "Yeah." So he took care of my blisters, taped my feet up, put some Dr. Scholl pads in my shoes, and I got back in the race. And then with about 3 miles to go, we could hear the screaming behind us. I caught a friend of mine, actually, from Michigan State. So we were running together. We could hear all the screaming behind us. And the crowds in Boston are amazing anyway. And they really scream loud, especially by Wellesley College. But anyway, we could hear the screaming. And we look back, and it's the first woman. And my friend's like, "Well, I'm not getting beat by a woman." So he takes off on me. And it turned out I finished right in front of her at the finish line. So my picture's in the paper the next day, But even with
Did you ever get to socialize with her?
Later on, I got to meet a lot of the famous, Boston Marathon runners.
So that was in 74. So let me backtrack just a little bit.
Yeah.
What kind of training are you doing personally every day to get ready for something like this? So what is your workout regimen, or over the weeks or months when you're
Yeah, so the early days, again, I had no knowledge of how to really train for marathon. And so my first one, I thought I'd never do another one after that. I was so cramped up. I thought, well, why am I doing this to myself? You know, but then you realize, you know, a week later, and many athletes, the first time they do a marathon, think how exciting the whole experience was. So later on, you realize, well, I can get through that pain, and you'd learn to train better. And I would run, that time I was probably running 35, 40 miles a week.
Wow.
You know, not every day, you know, and then I slowly built it up to like 60 miles a week. You know, and then when I started seriously training, I was running, 90 miles a week.
90 miles a week. Yeah. Were you doing any weight training at that time?
No weight training. And no stretching. No stretching either.
No calisthenics?
No.
Is that because people weren't as aware of that back then? Is that it? Then compared to now? Or is
no, I think... my wife would say I'm a freak of nature in that I have this gift that I've never really been injured from running marathons. I mean, minor stuff where I'd be out for a week or two and that was it. So nothing that really held me back. And so some people I think tend to overstretch, and the only thing today at 67 years old is I'm not as flexible. And if I suppose if I had done, yoga or Pilates or something, I might be a little more flexible today. But as far as running goes, I think spending all my time, I would take my time warming up. I wouldn't push too hard. I was never trying to run like PR, personal records. My goal was always to be more consistent. So I think that helped me in that I was not overtraining. I wasn't pushing my body to the maximum. I was going more for consistency than rather because I've seen many elite athletes that might last 4 or 5 years and they're done because they just couldn't handle all that stress. And it was never my intent. I was lucky I had a full-time job and I wasn't doing it to make money.
Interesting.
So,
was that with Detroit or?
In Detroit, yeah.
Yeah. So this 74, 75, would that have been the time Jim Fixx wrote his big major book?
Yeah, it would have been around that. It was in the 70s, yeah. And Frank Shorter, was like the big name back then because he had won the 72 Olympics in Munich and then silver in Montreal. And I know.
Did you get to meet him?
Oh, yeah, I've met him numerous times. In fact, he later on in his life, he said, I wish he could do what I did.
Really?
Running all the sub-220s.
He said he wished he could be.
Yeah, because he
Doug
same
Kurtis.
thing. He did. He actually did say that. He said he got to a point where he'd pushed his body so much he couldn't do it anymore. And so, he still struggles a bit physically because he pushed his body to the max. And those guys, he ran with a whole group out of the University of Florida where they were running 130, 140 miles a week.
Well, it's really funny because one of my favorite trumpeters of all time is Freddie Hubbard. And Freddie Hubbard overplayed. He played, too long or too many gigs and busted his lip permanently sometime in the 1990s.
Well, you did that about Louis Armstrong, too. Same thing.
Yeah. But what's interesting is that he wasn't able to play like he did. Nothing was ever the same. He continued to tour, but he didn't have the same facility. And that's interesting. Sometimes great artists or athletes will push it to the limit. It will, that happens, right? That's part of it.
You see it all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. There's a lot of news right now about the Nike project that has been disbanded, and Alberto Salazar, who was one of the top runners in the world at one time and coaching, pushing these women to the extreme, and they just couldn't handle that kind of stress. So, but I did it because it was fun.
So you did it for the love of it, basically?
I did it because I loved doing it, and it gave me lots of opportunities especially to travel, and as you discovered, I love meeting people.
Absolutely.
Mitch and I, by the way, we really connected at the library, by having a great conversation.
So what was the places you were traveling at that time? You said travel internationally, or?
So I started traveling internationally in the 80s.
Okay.
And it's kind of thing. It's like, you network. So I would meet people. I originally started running with Adidas, and Adidas gave us the opportunity to go to Honolulu Marathon. And through another teammate, he said, "Hey, do you want to go to Stockholm?" And that kind of wow, I can travel to Europe. I'd never been to any place like that in my life, and that kind of opened doors.
And how old would you have been at that time?
So I was 27.
27.
27. Yeah.
Wow. 80s, and that's close to your Olympic experience, isn't it?
Yeah. So my first.
Are we getting? Do we want to jump into that now, or is it back?
No.
Let's take our time with it.
Okay, we take your time. Yeah.
So you're training, and you're doing in the early 80s. You're working for Adidas in terms of what? In terms of athletic, representing their footwear or their.
Yeah. So their footwear.
Okay.
So they would. I mean, I had races that would pay my expenses to go.
Oh, excellent.
But if they didn't cover it, Adidas would take care of it.
Oh,
and they
excellent.
handled all my equipment. And then later, I actually did end up running for Nike, and Nike would
interesting.
pay me bonuses. So if I won a race, I'd get a bonus. Or if I run under 2 hours and 20 minutes, I'd get a bonus. Those kind of things. So
if you had to compare Adidas and Nike, and what would you? Any thoughts that come to mind about differences or similarities, or just the two?
There's so many good shoe companies now, and I think. And in fact, New Balance is one of my sponsors now with some of the events that I work on, and they all make great. I think they all make great shoes, and it's a question of finding what fits your physique. I'll toss in one thing, that you'll see like runners where would say, here's the perfect form, which I don't buy into at all. I think everybody's got an unusual makeup, and so they may run. If you were to look, say, the top 10 Olympic trials or even Olympic marathon finishers, they all have a different form. There's a form that may look good, just like baseball, where you'll see a hitter that their hitting form looks perfect, what you would say looks perfect
visually.
That doesn't mean it's perfect. That won't make him a 300 hitter. Running's the same way. You'll see him every different form, but a certain shoe may work out better for you than others, and hopefully you go to a running store where these guys are fitting runners every day, and they'll see, oh, here's the kind of shoe that's going to fit your particular running style. And I always tell people if they find a shoe that works for them, buy 2 pair. Because they change so often. Plus, I think it's good to change your shoe a lot.
Sure.
And let them dry out.
Well, it's interesting because you're in the 80s now, and you're starting to have a sense of yourself, right?
Yeah.
As having abilities, as being. So when did that first strike you? Like, I'm on my way. I'm ready to do the Olympics, or what? How did that come about?
Well, what happened actually? A guy at work who was actually a wrestler at Michigan State. He said, "I'll help coach you." He said, "I think you really have the talent to
you
make
were coached by a wrestler.
By a wrestler.
But isn't Michigan State known for their wrestling?
Yeah, they are. They had
They still
Iowa
are.
and Michigan State. Yeah, very good. Iowa and Michigan State had really great wrestlers. Yeah. So he knew how to train. And he said, all right, well, I'm going to help you train. And he had a good friend that was a senior broker at a brokerage firm. He says, I'm going to get you a sponsor so you can run the New York City Marathon. And this was back in 1980. Wow. So in fact, 78, 79. So leading up to 1980. So in 80, he said, we're going to get you Olympic trials. And he did. And I did the right kind of training to get there. And I'm one of only 5 guys that have qualified for Olympic trials 5 times. So
you're in rare company.
I'm in rare company. But that kind of set the wheels in motion that I knew I had some talent, but when I made the Olympic trials, that kind of changed everything where, and there was back then, even the early 80s, there wasn't really a lot of prize money involved. So it's like, all right, how much time do I want to invest in something that I'm going to get a little tiny medal for, So, but then the doors started open for travel. And then once I saw I was going to get opportunities to travel all over the place, then that changed everything. Then there was some incentive for me to work hard.
So if you're in the 80s, you said late 70s, did you ever go out dancing in addition to all this athletic activity during the day, or go to the disco? Or
absolutely.
You did?
Yeah, absolutely.
So so is it, I don't know anything about this. I mean, I dance for pleasure, but I'm never studied. But do marathon runners make good dancers, or is there any correlation?
Well, here's a funny story. So Boston's a good example. Boston's the kind of course that beats you up. I think it's a fast course if you run it smart. But when you're done, because of all the mix of uphill and downhills, you're beat up after you're done. But there's always a post-race party that night.
That's right.
And I've seen runners that
you mean at the disco?
Yeah, so I've seen runners that were hobbling around after the race, but they're out dancing that night.
So was this mostly in Michigan or wherever you were, or just
mostly Michigan, Detroit. Yeah. So and actually I think in some ways, it loosened you up. You're moving, you're doing some. So I think dancing in some ways could help you to,
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So as you were doing something a little bit different than running straight forward. So.
What was the impact that you would say Jim Fixx's book had, if you had to? Because I know he's more famous. Would you say that his book kind of got people running, or was that too?
Not necessarily for me, but I think for a lot of people, there were, and certainly there were some that would, say, oh, well, he died, of a heart attack. But
people make a lot of hay out of that.
Yeah, they'll take it negatively, but I don't buy into that. Obviously, fortunately, people are not buying into that. because if back then, like I say, Boston and having 2,000 runners, the New York City Marathon last month had over 50,000 people running. So running has really blossomed all over the world, really. Mm-hmm. And I think because it's a really relatively cheap sport. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't have to be a member of a club. You can just go out your door and run. And it's the quickest, easiest way to stay in shape. Even if you're walking, you don't even have to run, but even just to get out and walk and, get some fresh air and physical exercise, running, walking's the thing. I think the easiest way to be involved in physical activity. So,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
So we're in the 80s and you're going to be in the Olympics, correct?
Olympic trials. What
was the first year for that?
So, well, they did them back in the 60s. I know in the 60s.
I mean, for you.
Oh, for me. So 80s. So that was my first one. So 1980 was my first one.
Okay.
And my last one was 1996.
Wow.
Which you want me to tell you a story about it?
Oh, any story. Any or all stories.
Okay. So I love telling stories. So
you got great.
So it's and actually it relates to North Carolina.
Oh, interesting.
So 96 was Charlotte. So Charlotte Olympic Trials, and I had actually skipped a couple ones because I had other opportunities to go other places. Like my first two were in Buffalo, which wasn't all that exciting actually, but it was my first one. So I skipped the second one because I had opportunities to go to Munich, Germany, and Sydney, Australia. So it's like, all right, do you want to go to Buffalo or do you want to go to Sydney and Munich? Like, all right, have fun in Buffalo. So, but in 96, I knew it was going to be my last one, and I thought it'd be fun, and the organizers wanted me to come. So I had a cold like the week before. So I was the oldest guy in the field by over 4 years. So I'm like, okay, I didn't know how I'd do, but I'm in the race, and all of a sudden I look back and the ambulance is behind me, and I'm running last. And I'm like, oh well, I got an excuse. I'm the oldest guy, and I'm running last. And there was a coach who coaches, in fact, here in Asheville. Oh God, I can't think of his name right now. It'll come to me. But anyway, he puts on he used to put on summer camps here, and Roy Benson was his name. So I'm running, maybe it's about mile 20, and I'm thinking, oh great, Coach Roy Benson's going to see me, I'm running last. And I turn the corner, sure enough, there he is, and Coach says, hey, Doug, you're doing great. I'm like, yeah, well, I'm glad you think so, but I'm running last, and I figure it doesn't matter, at least I'm there. And there's only 100 people that qualified, so I'm still feel fortunate that I'm one of those 100. But the best part of the story is 2 miles to go, and I see this kid walk off the course. And I start yelling at him like, you only have 2 miles to go. You're in the Olympic trials. You can't quit. Get back here. So I yell at him. I get him back on the course.
Dude.
And I said, hey, we're going to run together. Well, I'm going to help you out. We're going to run together, and I can finish last. I don't care. And we start running together, and we get a quarter mile to the finish line. He says, I have to walk. I'm like, okay, fine. He goes, well, you go ahead. And I said, all right, well, you only got a quarter mile. I'm going to wait for you at the finish to make sure you cross that line. He goes, okay. So he does, and he crosses the finish line, and I didn't think that he knew who I was. He walks up to me, and he shakes my hand, and goes, Mr. Kurtis, thank you so much for making me finish. And I said, well, where are you from? And he said he's from Spartanburg. So it was like his hometown marathon, with his family there. And I'm like, aren't you glad that you finished? You were almost going to drop out, but he made it, and he's one of the few 100 that made it. And and here like his hometown Olympic trial. So anyway, that made it a special event.
Well, folks keep talking about something called the podium.
Yeah.
And the feelings people have. So do you want to talk? So the first time you were at the podium or a podium?
Podium. Well, I'll tell you one thing. So I've won, at one time I had the world record. I'd won 40 marathons. So, and I've also finished second 20 times in a marathon.
Yep.
Out of 200. And I never, certainly it's great to win. I love to win. But it was never my expectation that, a few marathons maybe because I knew I had the most talent in a race, but I never felt like, all right, all I wanted to do is cross the finish line and feel like I ran the best race I could. And if I won, great. If I finished second or third, oh well. As long as I crossed that line, I felt like I ran a good race. That's all I really, really cared about.
Interesting. So that's you're centered on finishing, making it to the finish, right?
Yes,
and running a good race.
And I tell that to people all the time. Nobody else knows but yourself when you cross that line, was it a good race for me? Nobody can know that.
Yeah, they don't know inside your
because they
head.
don't know how much training you went into it. How you felt that day, and you're not going to have a great day every time. It's impossible. Any athlete, any professional athlete knows that. There's no way every time you pitch a ball game, you're going to have a great game. It just doesn't work that way. So with running, I felt fortunate that I had many, many great races. So, but I'll tell you another story. So Austin, Texas Marathon. So I ran that several times. I couldn't even tell you the year I won. I couldn't tell you a story about it, but I can remember the year I finished third.
Interesting.
More so than the year I won.
What made that memorable?
Because I ran a perfect race. I ran everything I could do to win the race. And there were two other young kids with me. One of them was a friend of mine, and one was a Kenyan actually. And he was sitting behind us the whole race, and the two of us did all the work. And he figured he was going to outkick us at the end. And we got all the way to the 26-mile mark. So 365 yards to go, and the two young kids outkicked me. But it was just a great race. It was exciting. It was fun. The guy who won was my buddy, and he took me out to lunch and said, "Hey, thanks. You really, made me work." And I ran a great race. So it was just much more exciting than when I won the race. So,
do you speak about these things when you do motivational speaking? You're a motivational speaker. So hold that thought. We're going to get to that in a second.
Yeah.
Is not Breaking Away the greatest movie ever made? Or up there?
Yeah, that was a fun movie. Again,
that's bicycle.
Fun movie, yeah.
Yeah, but that's
cycling.
bicycling.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a sports
But it's motivational.
It's motivational.
Well,
Talk about that. So
Well, actually, just last weekend I watched the Ford versus Ferrari movie. Same thing. Talk about exciting and on the edge, and nervous. Even though even when you know the results of what happened, and especially since I worked at Ford Motor Company,
that's right.
And I knew, about Henry Ford II and and their experience going to Le Mans and building the GT40. It was. There's excitement and, any kind of sport where you've got that thrill of victory.
How many years were you at Ford?
So 31 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I don't know why Breaking Away I thought of that, just because it's something about it's Midwestern story.
Yeah,
it's Hoosiers.
Hoosiers, Indiana,
Indiana, and it's also like a team. Somebody will take over, Moocher will ride, and somebody else will ride.
There are very few races. I mean, earlier maybe, but later, after I won my first hometown marathon, I quit being nervous at races. It just kind of dissipated after that, fell away. And, and I would.
What's your new attitude then? You're not nervous, so what's that replaced by? What is your
I mean, there's still some anticipation. There's some degree of anticipation. But what made me think about when you talk about teams, I would get more nervous when I would run a team race than when I'd run my own race, because I get nervous for my teammates because I wanted them to do well.
Sure.
So rather than myself, because you kind of know I know what I'm capable of, but I want my teammates to do well. So I think there was more nervousness in being part of a team event.
So when you start speaking in public about these issues, what kinds of things are you getting into when you're talking to an audience, or what are some of the major?
Well, I do a two-part thing. So
Two parts, okay.
Motivation, what's motivated me to do what I've done, but what I've seen motivate other people. There's people that run like every state in the union. They want to do the 50 states thing, or they turn 40 or they turn 50. They want to say they've accomplished something at a particular, decade in their life. So you see those kind of things. And then courage, I'll do a thing like about a story. So I do a whole thing on courage. So I talk about the cowardly lion, what makes a king out of a slave, what makes the flag on the mast wave, and the cowardly lion always yelling courage. So I get my audience to yell courage. And so I did the first time I ever did this speech using that. It was up in Duluth, Minnesota.
Beautiful.
At Grandma's Marathon. And so after the race, these two kids came up to me at the award ceremony because they knew I was going to be there. And they said, Mr. Kurtis, we have to tell you, we were at mile 24. Our hotel was right there. It was a really hot day. And we thought about dropping out, but we looked at each other and pointed courage, that we had to have the courage to finish. And they did. And they just had to come up and see me and tell me that little part of the speech made a difference. Just they had it in their head. Courage was going to help them
beautiful
get to the finish line.
To get feedback like that so immediately, right?
Yeah.
How many people do you think you've inspired to improve their athleticism?
Oh, man.
Would you say, if you had to?
Probably more than 1,000. I would say more than 1,000 people pretty easily. The nice thing is, I've been on running clubs, many running clubs for years, and so I've inspired a lot of people to just even join a club so that they're involved. They have other people to encourage them, not just me, but get them in an environment where other people are going to motivate them to get out and run. And some of these people are people that have done all 50 states. That when I first met them, never even thought about running, and got to a point that now here they were running in all 50 states.
So somebody's an idea of somebody's goal would be, I need to get every 50, all 50.
Yeah.
And so they go from never thinking about running, you said.
Yeah.
And then soon, they're doing it.
And then they're
going to Illinois and Texas and California and everywhere.
An excuse to travel, that they have the
so
opportunity and the finances to be able to do it. And there they are, making that a goal to visit other states.
What other speeches you've given that have come to mind, or unusual locations, or for, I don't know, for companies or for...
Well, okay, another story. So I'm at a convention in Spokane, Washington, and I'm running along, and so I'm part of talk about running clubs. I'm part of I don't run with them that often, but I'm part of a running group called the Hash House Harriers. And Hash House is a slang term for a cheap restaurant. Okay, so this group started, it was a bunch of British guys in Malaysia back in, I think I want to say the 1930s. I'm probably wrong on the date, but it was like mid 1900s. And so they were eating, and they want to keep eating and drinking. And so they would devise these runs and run-walk. And so they'd use chocolate and flour, and you have to find the right way to go. And then they'd all create nicknames for themselves, and they just make a lot of fun out of it. And you'll see sometimes bumper stickers with a little foot and it says on. So the hares, or the people out front, would yell on, meaning you're on the right trail. So going full circle here. So I'm running on this morning run with this convention, and all these people are making the wrong turn. And without thinking about it, I yelled on. And this kid comes up from behind me and said, "Oh, you're a Hash House Harrier." I'm like, "Yeah." And I introduced myself. He goes, "Oh, Doug Kurtis, I know who you are.
You're a celebrity.
You're a celebrity."
People,
and he said, "Do you do public speaking?" And I said, "Yeah, occasionally." He said, "Well, I'm a member of the Houston Track Club, and we have a lot of money. And would you come down and speak to us? We'll fly you down and pay your expenses and all that." I'm like, great. And all because I yelled on. I was here. I'm down in Houston talking to a whole group of people. Yeah.
Well, it's almost mystical connections between people, right?
Sometimes
it's kind of interesting. What was Texas like when you were there?
I got lucky because it was in August, where it's usually really hot, but they had a fluke weekend where it was 75, and the weather was really nice. And I ran with the Hashers, who they do all kinds of crazy stuff. In fact, even here in Asheville, they'll run across streams. They'll go and so this one crossed streams, I think, 12 times in this big state park. And then obviously finished at a bar somewhere. By the way, this group too does themed runs where you wear a dress. So they have a red dress run. San Diego has like 5,000 people that show up in a red dress. I could tell some really crazy stories about Houston or about hashing, but I'm not sure if I should go there.
You should probably. What comes to mind in your consciousness right now?
I'll let you decide if you want to edit it out. So the hashers,
they're a wild bunch. Huh?
They're a wild bunch. I think, and here's again where, here I'm an elite athlete, but I know how to have fun. It's not always about pushing, but enjoying the experience. So I think I did my first hash actually in Hong Kong. So I was running the Hong Kong Marathon, and the hashers there said, "Hey, come and run this race." I'm like, "This is the coolest thing. This is fun." They ran at night. They had to use a flashlight to find the right way to go. And so there's a lot of self-deprecation and people just enjoying the sport.
Sounds like it.
Taking it all so serious.
So
my wife and I went on this. They have intra and international hashes. So the intra hash, people from all over America show up for an event, and then they have international hashes with people travel all over the world. So there's hashing like everywhere, all over the world. So anyway, I went on this intra hash that was also part of an Alaskan cruise. So I'm on the cruise, and this woman who's part of our group, this girl next door, sweet as can be, from Indiana, and she's crocheting a dress. Yeah. And she's on the ship, and she's crocheting. The last night there, they had a dance, and she's in her dress, and I'm dancing with her. Going back to dancing, right? We're having fun. And So I said, wow, great dress. This is fabulous. Nice job. And she said, oh, I'm using it for their intra-hash. And she didn't tell me why, but she was saying the intra-hash. I'm like, okay. And this is my first experience doing an intra-hash. So, and this was down in Portland.
Portland, Oregon.
The ship comes back into Seattle. We take a train down to Portland, and there's like 3,000 people in this park.
Oh boy.
And so they have a Miss Intra-Hash. So these women get up on the stage and they have to do some kind of routine to win Miss Intra-Hash. Yeah. And this woman who I'm still friends with her today too. Yeah, well. And she now lives in DC. And anyway, just charming as can be. And anyway, she's up in this crochet dress. And she hands 2 pieces of the yarn of the dress to 2 guys. And they unravel the entire dress. Oh, yeah. And she has some pasties for a little bit of modesty, but basically she's standing nude, in front of 3,000 people on stage.
It's good stuff.
And after the race, after the thing, I'm talking to her like, wow, you won. She's got the sash, on.
It's beautiful.
And it was like she said, this is like the greatest day of my life, that I've won, and I'm Miss Intra-Hash,
Well, it's a sort of good, clean fun, I guess.
Yeah, so it's good, clean fun, but...
Well, it's funny what drives people. I mean, everybody, it's funny to think about this woman doing that.
Yeah.
And there's probably another woman somewhere that would be horrified at that or not want to do that.
Yeah.
What do you make? I mean, I know that you do public speaking, so you're probably very keenly aware that different things motivate different people, or, different people are probably afraid of different things, or confident in different things. But your job, right, when you're speaking, is to cut through all that, right?
Well,
your job is to get people to overcome their fears and
yes. Yep. So when we talk about courage is basically overcoming your fear. I mean, Shakespeare and Frank L. Baum who wrote Wizard of Oz will tell you, fear is there's no courage without having fear. Courage is overcoming a fear that you have. In fact, here's another good story. So New York City Marathon, I'm at the starting line of the New York City Marathon, and I see a whole row of people making sure that we're behind the line, and their arms are all locked. And I lock eyes with this nice, I don't know why I thought she was Irish looking, but she happened to be Irish. And we kind of, our eyes connected, and we just saw each other. And I wanted to come up and hug her, but I didn't know her, and so I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that, right? But I had this feeling I wanted to go up and hug her. Boy. And so then I'm at the finish line, and she shows up again, and we have a nice conversation. I said, well, maybe I'll see you at the awards ceremony tonight. Well, she said she typically wouldn't come to the awards, but she knew I was going to be there, so she showed up. And we started talking, and she was a psychologist. They have a psych team, and all these psychologists walk around with a clipboard, and they ask people what they're afraid of. Like, people have bridge phobias, so they're afraid to cross bridges. So what they would do is they would take the ribbon that the winner crossed from the year before, cut it in little pieces, put a safety pin to it, and they'd put it up on their singlet or whatever they were wearing. They say, every time you start to feel fearful, touch that ribbon and visualize that you're going to cross the finish line. And they said for a lot of people, that simple little thing of visualizing crossing the finish line would work for them. So, and that woman that I met, so 9 months later, I married her.
Oh, wow.
Of course, I hate to say this, but 5 years later, I divorced her too. Or she divorced me. I don't know. Either way, but being married to a therapist for 5 years was a little tough. But
what makes it tough?
I give her credit. She moved from Midtown Manhattan to a little town in Michigan. And so
that's hard.
It was hard for her. So and now she's back on the East Coast.
Well, sure.
Yeah, she's doing fine now. But,
well, you're both happy.
I miss her family, though. She had a great family. Lived in Port Jefferson, Long Island, and some of them lived in Midtown Manhattan. And the family parties were all really a lot of fun. And they were all runners, too. So it was kind of nice that when I showed up at the family gatherings, my second date with her was coming up. My second date was Thanksgiving, and the family thought, you've only met this guy and you're having him come to Thanksgiving dinner? And they said, yeah, it'd be fine. And I had a blast with her whole family.
It was Doug Kurtis, though.
Yeah,
it's a little different.
I don't know. That was I said it was an end, yeah. When you're a good runner, I think you get a little... Well, people do treat you a little differently, when they find out you're accomplished at something. Whatever it is. Being a great pianist, that makes a difference. People I think, do give you maybe a little higher level of respect because of they know that you've done a lot of work to get where you are.
That's probably true. Your current wife is an athlete.
Yeah, she's an athlete too. And in fact, she's
and a
loving
serious
living
athlete.
here in Asheville. She's run 38 marathons. 38, but she's a wonderful hiker. She's got a whole group of girls here or women, I should say, that, love to hike. So it's just really.
Did you want to talk about her experience in the Boston Marathon?
We can, if you'd like.
She was in
She was in the year that the explosion happened. Yes,
Yeah.
I happened to be home that year. Usually I was there, but I was.
And
home
where I
that
was? I was there. I was on Boylston Street.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
So, wow.
Wow. Right where that first bomb went off, a number of times I had been in that exact area because that's where all the Kenyan families hung out. Which they were gone by then, and usually I was too. But that was one of the spots where I would hang out with the Kenyan families and watch the first runners come in when I was there just helping out.
Wow.
But for Ann, she had just crossed the finish line and looked back and heard and saw the explosion. And for her, it was really difficult, in part, not just the experience right there, but she was a hygienist. So for the next 6 months, every patient that came in would ask her about her experience. And so every day she was reliving that.
Oh, she had to talk about it.
She had to talk about it, and usually I hadn't seen my wife that emotional, but Anne got pretty emotional, talking about that event. And still, I think she wants to go back to Boston again. I think in part to kind of get past that.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So
she's going to run a marathon next year, in part to hopefully qualify for the Boston Marathon again.
Oh, excellent. So she's a Midwesterner like you, right?
Yes, she is.
Michigan?
Yeah. In fact, we met. We first met when I was running out my backyard. She had a boyfriend at the time.
Oh, boy.
And a year later, she had left her boyfriend, and I was putting on a Hash House Harrier run, and she was a Hash House Harrier. And she thought I'd be really serious and intense, and she thought that was the kind of person I was. And then, he's putting on a hash run, maybe he isn't so serious. And I'm much more playful, and she's probably more serious than I am. And so because of that, she showed up at that event, and then we started dating. I'd actually left my car in a cemetery with all the beer in it, and I said, "Can you take me back to my car? I got to go pick up the beer," And so that's when I asked her for a date, and then life's been great ever since.
Well, it seems it. You seem like a really great couple.
Yeah.
And
my wife's awesome. But the best thing about my wife is she's easy to talk to. We can sit at dinner, we can sit at Blue Mountain Pizza for 2 hours and not run out of conversation,
That's important, isn't it?
It is important. I think that's...
When people can't talk to each other, that's death, right?
It's very strange when you see people at a restaurant and they're just sitting across from each other and not talking. How can you do that? It's beyond me. So
that's true.
Yeah, Ann's really enjoyable to talk to.
Do people really know more now about the human body than when you first started running? I know there's been advances about chemistry or legs or whatever. Talk about how people see it differently now and then, or it could be medical, or it could be anything.
Well, certainly, just even back in the 70s, in fact, going back to Frank Shorter, his idea of a drink was drinking defizzed Coca-Cola. Where here you got Gatorade. I mean, there's all kinds of different products out there for, drinking during the race, and like these little goo packets, some sugar packets. I found even as you age, you find different things too, where, when I was running under 2 hours and 20 minutes, I was done so quickly, I didn't have to worry. I pretty much drink water and not have to worry about it. But as I got older and a little slower, I would, maybe take some kind of sugar supplement late in the race, because I would just, be able to run better late as your glycogen stores start to wear, late in the race. So yeah, that changes. But certainly, going back to like shoes, having much better shoes than back in the 70s. So, and certainly racing at my level, having really light, comfortable shoes that fit you well made a big difference too. Even better socks, than what they had back then. So,
any thoughts or impressions about the visual spectacle or theater of, say, the Olympic trials or a race? What thoughts come to mind about how that's changed, or what impresses you, or what doesn't impress you about just because this is something that people like to watch, right? People that aren't running, or
Well, the wonderful thing is, I mean, unfortunately it's a very hard thing to televise. So outside of a New York or Chicago or London major marathon, very hard to put the money behind televising a marathon today. But the wonderful thing is there's so many great races all over the world, and actually almost every major city, even the U.S. Cities have figured out that it's a moneymaker. It's an opportunity, and it brings the community together. Not just the people that are running, but you're getting thousands of volunteers to help you. So they're coming from all over the place, and most of them are involved with charities too. Boston raises millions of dollars in charities, so that's another opportunity to raise money for all your local charities. So and then you design great courses. So you're showing off your city. So you can go to any major city, and get to experience that city and see the highlights of that. So
what are some of your personal highlights going to Boston or Cambridge? I'm sure you have.
Well, certainly, like I just shared my first one. Running my first Boston was an amazing experience, even though I didn't run that great, but I was lucky that one year at 42, I probably ran the best race of my life, and it was at Boston, and I won the Masters division, which is 40 and over. And to give you an idea, so back then it was $10,000 for first place for first Masters. So I won that one year, and I had been second 2 years prior. And I was racing against the same guy, but this year everything came together, and I ran 2:15. So it was really one of the best races I'd ever run. And the cool thing about it, not just the race itself, but that particular year, all the winners, the hand cyclists and the top runners and the Masters runners, all got invited to the White House. So and Clinton was the president at the time. So we went out running with him.
You went running with the president?
We went running with the president, ran around Haynes Point and did the loop.
What was that? That's interesting. Well,
actually, he ran pretty well. And everybody laughed, teased about him. Did he stop at McDonald's, and all that. But for a big guy, he actually ran pretty well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then
I had heard that he was kind of athletic. Would you say he is?
I would say he was, and certainly now, if you look at him now, he's actually I don't know what he's doing, but he's certainly pretty thin now. The last few pictures I've seen of him. But the nice thing too, we all got 10 minutes. With him, individual 10-minute time to talk to him. And I had just come back from Vietnam. I had won the Hanoi Marathon. So he was asking, he was trying to open up relations with Vietnam. And he was just asking me about my own personal experience of running in Vietnam, which was actually great. The Vietnamese, I was surprised because I won the race in Hanoi and where the North Vietnamese are, and I thought people wouldn't like me, because here's an American winning the race. But it was just the opposite. I'm in town, and people are stopping me, and they were handing me a carnation, and they would ask me if I needed a ride anywhere, and they were finding a camera so they could have their picture with me, and they were really gracious. And because I was on television there, they were all calling me Marathon Man, Marathon Man, Marathon Man, And so anyway, they were very, very nice to me, and I was surprised at that because I didn't think that was the kind of reaction I'd get.
Well, you got a good reaction, so that tells you something, right? At least about Vietnam in that time.
Yeah, and Vietnam was beautiful when I was there. I mean,
never been.
I mean, the nice thing about when I've traveled.
The food's good too.
The food's great.
That's a whole other,
But just about everywhere I went, as a guest of that particular marathon, I would have people to show me around. I'd get to go to a lot of the really cold. I was never one to sit in my hotel room. I wanted to go experience the culture. So
Doug, you don't see someone. You don't seem to me like someone's going to sit.
You don't when you're going to
stay in your hotel,
a new country, and you get to see the cultural and see the dance. Like in South Korea, seeing the fan dancers, or Thailand, where you see the gals with the foot-long fingernails that do dance routines, and the monkey warriors, and all those kind of things. I mean, to have those opportunities, I wasn't going to pass that up.
Yeah, you're not going to sit in a hotel.
No way.
But I'm sure you had some good accommodations, right? Traveling.
Usually I would stay in nice hotel rooms. Yeah, they would put me up. And like I say, I would have, usually during the day, there would be people to show me around, and then same in the evening if they were, and they're usually, they were, and most marathons, it isn't just the race itself. They'll have an expo, or they have other activities surrounding the race too. Yeah. So I had, I had got to go to a lot of fun things that surrounded the race too.
Celebrities, you've met a few of them, right? do you want to talk about any known or unknown or any? It don't have to be in sports.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you've World of Running or what comes to mind. I know you mentioned.
Boy, I'm trying to think of one that I really
Not Mark
enjoyed
Spitz.
reading.
Who was it that you?
Oh, well, sometimes I just meet them just enough to say hi, but not more than that, to not really necessarily talk to them. You know, like I remember actually meeting Dustin Hoffman running in Central Park one day before the New York City Marathon. You know, and he was out running pretty good too. Of course, he was in a running movie too.
Marathon Man. Yeah.
Marathon
Speaking
Man.
of Marathon Man.
So, you know, and you just, the typical thing, you just say, hey, I admire your work, you know, and you just give them a compliment, but you don't want to bother them, you know.
Well, I mean, socially, didn't you? I mean, didn't you meet some people that were really known in sports or people that could be swimming or tennis?
Bill Rogers is probably one of the most famous. You know, Bill and I actually competed against each other numerous times, yeah. You know, and Bill was a lot of fun. You know, really nice guy. A little harder to give a speech with, though.
Why is that?
He's kind of like all over the place, and we'd do a speech together, and I'd have to kind of reel him in, you know, and say, "All right, come on, let's stay focused."
Was he kind of chaotic when he spoke?
Yeah, man. Yeah, he'd even. Some people liken him to Peter Pan. You know, he's like still like a little kid. You know, but he was a nice guy. I mean, he'd be somebody that would sit around for hours and hours signing autographs, and you know, and he'd remember people's names, which always floored me. That he might meet somebody once or twice, but still remember who they were.
Bill Rogers.
So but he won Boston 4 times and New York 4 times. So after that, you're gonna. It's kind of like once you're famous, you're always famous. Hard for that. You know, that doesn't go away.
What was the last time you spoke in public? If you could think.
I probably saw him.
You spoke or did a speech about anything? When would that have been? Your last public motivational
a little over a year ago. I actually did it in Detroit, and I'll usually combine it with something. So I had a friend who had just taken over handling the Michigan Humane Society in Detroit, and they had a beautiful facility there with a big area to do public speaking, so it was kind of a win-win, and I got to speak in front of an audience, and then we did a whole tour of their facilities, and we actually had a few people adopt dogs and cats while I was there. So it really turned out well. Yeah.
Do you how much do you plan your speech? Is what you're going to say? How pre-planned is it versus improvised?
So I have a whole slideshow, which makes it really easy for me. So my slides tie to what I'm speaking about, so they're seeing a visual of what I'm talking about, so that makes it really easy too. I mean, I've done the speech enough times that I lock in, and I really enjoy Q&A, so I'll spend probably at least a half hour, and it's very easy for me to tell stories like we are now. Somebody will ask a question, and it'll turn into some story about something, so I find that really easy, and then I develop more of a personal connection that I'm answering somebody a question who's in the audience.
Sure.
So I find that a lot. I find that very easy to do.
And you've also been in cars, right? Vehicles. So what comes to mind about how cars are changing, or how Ford's changed? Or
well, actually, just in this week in the LA has got the auto show right now.
Are you going?
No, I'm not going.
You're here. You're not. Yeah.
Detroit actually moved their auto show. It used to be in the fall. Now they're moving to summer, which actually is great for me because I'm going to be up doing turkey trot here, and we used to have to worry about. I mean, it takes them months to set up that whole exhibit hall. So now they're not in our way anymore. But LA this coming week, Ford just showed.
I love LA.
They're doing a new SUV that looks like a Mustang.
Okay.
Yeah. So it has kind of a Mustang look, but it's an SUV, and that's going to come out the end of next year. So I thought that was something interesting or something different, and it's all electric too. So
electric. So you were 30 years in cars, right?
30 years, yeah.
So yeah. I'm guessing that you saw a lot of changes in automobiles or automation.
Yeah.
Now, what are cars now? They're like big computers on wheels, right? More or less.
What I like the most I like is, I'd say like late 70s, 80s, the quality was terrible, you know, and it's like the engineers didn't care that much, and and the Japanese were beating us up.
That's right.
The quality was so much better, and that kind of raised the bar to all right, if you want to stay in business, you got to turn this around. So, and I still have friends that work in the plants up there, and they said the quality difference from even 5 years ago is enormous. Big difference in how they design and build cars now. not that there's always problems, especially when you have a brand new car off the line. You're still working out things, but even still, the quality compared to 20 years ago is huge difference.
I'm guessing that's partly technology, or is it also partly, is it vision too,
well,
and like imagination?
Technology for sure, but also methods. Like the Deming method of looking at quality, and and looking at, okay, here's how we build a part, and and is that part up to specifications, and constantly, you've got enough people now that are really paying attention to the specifics of every single part on that vehicle.
Yeah, that's important if you want people to get home in one piece.
Yeah, you want them to last. Yeah. But I'm excited about that the world changing and doing electric vehicles and doing something that isn't gas powered too. So, and then the whole self-driving thing. I'm hoping by the time that I make it to my 90s, and I don't have to worry about somebody taking the keys away from me, because I'll have a self-driving car.
You're already thinking about that. You're planning way ahead.
I know.
Far in the future. In advance.
Yeah.
It's good to plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just that's incredible. Cars and technology and all of it.
Yeah.
Any other sports that you follow avidly now? I mean, I know that you.
I read through 3 newspapers every morning.
That's right. You were telling me you
I know.
that.
So I read my Free Press, because being a writer there, I like the way the paper's laid out.
Yep.
So
New York Times.
And I want to know about what's happening in my hometown anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But I read the New York Times, and I'll skim through. I'll pick articles here and there. And then
what writers do you
I always
like?
want to know my local paper. So
Sure.
the Asheville Times, I'm reading that too.
What writers do you follow or like, or that you think, oh, this person really writes well, or that?
Well, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit, being another Mitch, but Mitch Album.
Mitch Album.
Mitch
That's
Album.
right.
And Mitch as a writer is phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
As a radio host, he likes to, like many typical radio hosts, they're looking for controversy or complaining about stuff. I guess that's maybe the easy to do. So I'm not a big fan of listening to, radio hosts,
That's funny, because my show. That's funny you mentioned that, because I'm like the anti. My whole show is trying to do the opposite of that. That's funny.
Yeah. Well, sometimes they want to go to the extreme to entertain, especially if you're on every day. You're
like Imus in the morning or something.
Yeah. So it's like, do I want to read? I don't know. I just want to hear the truth, I guess. And sometimes if they're really stretching the truth, then I have trouble wanting to listen to somebody if they're not.
But reading 3 papers every day is very. That's kind of the way to do it, right?
Yeah.
That's the way to do it. Yeah. If everybody did that, maybe papers would be in business still.
Yeah. I'm kind of. It's kind of sad, I guess, is the best way I can put it.
That's a mild way of putting it.
Yes, that young people today. Okay, I don't care if you're not reading a hard copy newspaper, but you have a tablet or a computer. It's so easy for you to look at the news, and I don't watch TV on the news. To me, that's entertainment.
Interesting.
So outside of maybe watching election
Returns,
results,
yeah.
I don't really watch any kind of news whatsoever. Occasionally, maybe that usually the number one our newscaster is the weatherman, because whenever, and they love it when there's bad weather, because people want to tune in when the weather's bad.
Sure.
Makes sense, So I would rather get my news from reading, and plus, New York Times, if you want to really read an in-depth article about something, the opportunity's there.
Mm-hmm.
I just read one yesterday about Mr. Rogers.
The new film that's coming out.
Yeah, the new film's coming out. So they did a real in-depth story from somebody who knew him most of his life.
Yeah.
And those are really good stories to read. So I like the New York Times, for finding those kind of stories. Yeah.
Are there writers, aside from yourself, of course, at the Detroit Free Press who you will wave the flag for? You that man or woman was a terrific writer. And
I can't say anybody specifically, but I was blessed that I had a great editor.
Who was that?
God, I'm just losing it right now. Give me a second and I'll think of it. Owen Davis. Owen Davis was just a wonderful man too, and
you mean as a person,
and he actually
actually
he's up in Winston-Salem now. His wife was from there, and she was having some physical issues and has since passed away, but he moved back to be with her family and still lives there in Winston-Salem. But interesting, a story.
Oh yeah.
So I'm at his retirement party, and his daughter's sitting next to him. And she gets out, and he says, my daughter came here because there was one person she really wanted to meet. And everybody looked at Mitch Albom thinking she wanted to meet Mitch, right? And he says, no, he wanted to meet Doug Kurtis. She wanted to meet Doug Kurtis.
Yeah. So there you go.
So I was like, it was kind of fun that I got a one-up on Mitch.
What makes a great editor? You write copy, so you imagine you wrote about sports and wrote about baseball.
Well, I wrote about running. No, I wrote.
Oh, you only wrote about running?
Only wrote about
column.
running. Yes,
that's
only
fantastic.
About running.
And so, his name is Mr. Owen.
Yeah.
What
Davis.
Owen Davis. What is he? What makes him a great editor? What is he? How does he look and interpret your writing, or how does he relate to your writing? So, an example.
The one thing I almost see writing as a piece of art.
Well, of course it is. Yeah,
it really is. And so when you write something, I would go through many edits myself. So I'd try to give it as clean as I could. Mm-hmm. And then they would give me 500 words, but every once in a while I'd say, "Oh, and I need 700 for this." And in fact, usually they'd say write 550 or more, and they would, if depending on what space they had, they'd take out or add, or some. Rarely would they ask me to put more in. Magazines would.
Magazines would.
Magazines would.
What's an example of a magazine that said,
Marathon and Beyond magazine, which doesn't exist anymore, but they would always tell me, "Oh, we want a 2,000 word article," and then they'd come back, "Can you do 3,000?" And so they'd want me to embellish what I was writing. I'm like, okay, and I would. But Owen was just, what the last thing you want is for them to put their words into your column, because usually that's not what I would have said, or whatever. So he was really good about just getting it right. I mean, making sure, I had the commas in the right place and saying, or maybe he might suggest to me, this might be better said this way. I'm like, yes, and 9 times out of 10, he was absolutely right. This was a better way to say a particular line or a paragraph.
Did that paper use a certain manual of style that you remember? That was like kind of the book or
that I don't know.
Chicago or
yeah. But many times they say sports is like the easiest columns to read.
It's a myth, though, right?
I mean, that they would say they gear it to like a 6th or 7th grade education.
That's right.
So maybe I was lucky that way.
Well, who was some funny sports columnists who. The 70s, wasn't the 70s the era of the sports writer?
Yeah, well, I mean, not that I would read many bowling columns, but but certainly, I mean, bowling was big in Detroit, so we have a whole columns right about bowling every week.
Every week.
Yeah.
Who was the bowling writer?
Oh man,
what was he like?
It's been 20 years. Yeah. It's been 20 years now, so I can't remember his name now. But he was a full-time writer, so he was, and I'm most of these guys, they might write their particular column, but they helped with other columns too.
Is it Frank Gifford? Who the heck? Wasn't there a book called The Sports Writer? That may have been Frank Gifford. I don't know. My brain is
the football player.
Well, no, he became a writer, didn't he? I mean, there was some. There were different athletes that become sports writers. They became sports writers. But I don't know. It's Do you like movies about? So do you like North Dallas 40 and Friday Night Lights and?
I like a good story. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be a horror film, like a Stephen King film.
Yeah.
So if it's a good story, then I enjoy the film. Yeah.
Well.
So.
Excuse me. You're right about that.
Yeah. So that's what I want to, and I like to be entertained. I have a hard time with films that are really depressing.
Yeah.
Or so. I don't want to walk away and feel like, oh man, life's sad, and there are films like that out there.
Oh, and especially now.
Yeah, especially now.
Oh,
the worst is my wife and I, every year we go to the Academy Award nominated short films, and my friends call them the slit your wrist films, because last year's were so bad, and unfortunately they were all about children too.
Oh, that's hard.
And just gut wrenching horror stories, and like, why do you want to film stuff like that? I go to movies because I want to be entertained. You want to kind of, not necessarily want to leave, life's troubles behind.
So you really want Brittany Runs a Marathon in a way?
Yeah, I thought it was fun. Plus, I like uplifting stories. Even going to plays.
Which that is.
Even going to a play like Come From Away is one of my favorite plays about 9/11 when all these planes that get diverted to Newfoundland and how the town gets behind all these people, and
Yeah.
and what are they going to do? 5,000 people show up in a town of 3,000. How do you handle that? And it's a beautiful musical. So I like to see things that are uplifting, which is why I talk about motivation and courage.
That's right.
I want to uplift people. I want people to be the best they can be. That's what I care about. I want to do positive things for people.
That's a great way to get. We're getting near the close of this fantastic show, but what comes to your mind? You have given a speech, or you've gotten somebody to do a 360-degree transformation. Somebody, what comes to mind? Somebody who's really unfit, or somebody that never walked, or whatever, and then who comes to mind? Somebody that you really for a fact that you turn their life around and they become.
Perfect question. A neighbor, actually, across the street, and I lived in a little one-street cul-de-sac, and she would ride her bike round and round the cul-de-sac, which is all of like maybe 300 yards or 400 yards, not much. And I lived literally on this parkway that she could run with, this beautiful parkway where she could ride her bike, but she was afraid to, whatever, and I said, no, you know what? You're going to be fine. There's so many people out there. You're not going to have to worry. You need to get out. You need to get out of this rut and get out and do it. And she would run a little bit on her treadmill in the basement every morning before she was a school teacher.
Interesting.
And she came to one of my talks.
Oh boy.
And she just ran the Monumental Marathon in Indiana a month ago. She's run a couple of them now. In fact, I went out and helped her with one of her training runs. And I said, she's doing a 20-mile training run. I said, well, I'll do the last 5 with you. So I drove out there, we ran together, and I inspired her and encouraged her. And now, she lost a lot of weight and just is more fit than she's ever been. And you'll see her post on Facebook, and she's like, my life has changed.
Interesting.
And she said she'd see me running past her house like every day, and then said, all right, if this guy can do it, why can't I? So it's wonderful to see somebody's life really change for the better, and very confident, especially for women. I think women, once they start experiencing running a race, they feel confident, and they feel really good about themselves, that they can do something they didn't think they could do.
Well, Doug Kurtis, that's a good way to end. I always hate saying goodbye to people, but but all things must come to an end, and
we'll cross paths. We live in a small little town that we love, so we'll be crossing paths.
But we really enjoyed having you on Journey of an Aesthete. Doug Kurtis, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.